I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I'm going to use some spray paint and a free pallet to make a serving tray. I picked out some slats from some old pallets that I had taken apart a while back, using dark ones for the bottom and light ones for the sides. I had to knock out some of the nails from the ends so I could safely put these through the saws. I marked the length on each one of the pieces, making sure to avoid the nails, and then cut them down to length on the miter saw. I used this sled, which helps clamp down a piece so you can run it through the blade to get a nice clean cut on one edge. You can then use this edge against the fence to clean up the opposite side. A sled like this is a great alternative to a joiner if you don't have one. I cleaned up the opposite edge and then ran my longer pieces, which actually had pretty clean edges, through the table saw and cut them down to strips that were about 2 inches thick. The thicker boards I cut down also on the miter saw. These will act as the end pieces. I cleaned up both sides just like before. Next I had to make the bottom panel out of the pieces that I'd cut, and that's really simple when you have these nice clean faces to use. I glued them up and clamped them together, making sure to clamp from the top and the bottom. While that was drying, I ran all the other pieces through the planer. Now you don't necessarily need a planer here because I wasn't changing the thickness, I really just wanted to sand the outside. I wanted the outsides of the tray to be really smooth, so you could do this with a sander if you'd like. With the panel all dry, I was able to use a crosscut sled and my flat edge to square up the ends. And finally I ran over it with some 150 grit sandpaper just to knock off the dirt and smooth it to the touch a little bit. I set my side panels in place and marked where they needed to be cut, and I did that cutting on the miter saw. Once these were cut down, I set them in place and measured the full width so I could make the end pieces. I drew out a line for the height of the side panels and then another line 1.5 inches up. I found the center of that line and then put in some nails along the edge. I used a flexible ruler here to draw a curve from edge to edge, meeting the top line. I cut out those lines on the bandsaw. You could also do that with a jigsaw. And then I trimmed them down to length on the miter saw. Pieces were close but not exactly the same, so I clamped them together and took them to the belt sander to actually make them match. On each piece I measured 1.25 inches from the center line and drew a dot. And on that dot I drilled a hole with a 1.25 inch Forstner bit. Now these holes overlap just a little bit, and that makes a cavity big enough for my hand to fit through as a handle. I drew some lines for reference and then used a chisel to clear out the remaining wood in that space. After I got it pretty close, I took a flexible sanding block and some flexible sandpaper to clean it out and smooth it out as much as I could. I used some painter's tape to wrap the outside of each one of these end pieces fully. I used a pencil to go over the edges to try to push the tape down onto the wood as best as I could to fill any gaps. Then I went back with a utility knife and trimmed it all flush on one side. It was a little bit trickier to get the inside of the handle, but as long as you take the blade out of the knife, you can get a nice close cut to the edge. I did the same for the side panels, and then I ran over all these pieces with a couple of coats of clear spray lacquer. This is going to fill any gaps that were left around the tape and stop paint from bleeding through. After that dried, I covered the whole thing with several light coats of spray paint with some light sanding in between the first couple of coats. When I removed all the tape, I was really happy to see that there was little to no bleed from the paint going around the sides of the wood. You end up with a really nice clean line this way. Then the pieces could all be set in place and nailed together. I usually shoot with 18 gauge 1.25 inch nails unless there's a need to do something different. And in this case I shot it both into the frame and into the bottom panel all the way around, so it was pretty strong. And finally, I finished it off with several coats of spray lacquer again, and man, it really makes that dark wood pop. I love the way that that looks. So I was really happy with how this turned out. I'm also really happy with spray lacquer as a finish for projects like this. It makes wood like this actually pretty smooth to the touch and you don't feel like you're gonna get a splinter, but at the same time it's not like a brush on thing that you have to worry about doing a really great job of brushing on. You can do a few coats of spray and you get a pretty nice smooth finish. So over the years I've made a lot of these as presents and to sell at craft shows and things like that. And I've done a lot of different size, different proportions, different height, different types of grips. There's a lot of different ways you could customize this, and they're all about the same construction. And since you're pre-gluing the panel for the bottom, you can make that into a pattern of any kind you want. I've done a lot of herringbone ones, checkerboards, or things like that. There's give you a lot of options to make this look very different. This is one that we just have around the house that we use to carry things around, and it's a lot rougher than the one I did in this video. And so as you make these, you can just decide how rustic you want it to be or how finished you want it to be. Normally when I make these out of bare wood, I put some glue around the outside of this panel before I put the side pieces on. And since these are painted, that wood glue is not going to do quite as much. It might do a little bit, but it's not going to hold like it really would wood to wood. So even though these side panels are not glued on, I think it's still going to be plenty strong to just carry food around or drinks or something like that. It's definitely not coming apart. But if that was a big concern for you, you could mask off the bottom of these pieces so that you had wood to wood contact down there and then use wood glue just to reinforce it. So that's it for this one, guys. I really hope you can take this general design and make it custom for you, sell them, give them away as presents, something, but just go have fun with it. I hope you liked this one, and if you did, I'd love to hear about it. You can tell me in the comments below or at ILikeToMakeStuff.com. If you want to support these videos, Patreon is the best way to do that. You can go down there and check that out. And I've got a lot of other projects you might be interested in, so feel free to look around. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.